They thought it was a water crisis. It was a coup. The alert didn't sound like panic, it sounded like procedure. A single tone, flat, synthetic, rolled through the concourse of Silt Hollow and died against the concrete ribs of the old metro station. The waterline froze in place, the way a body freezes when it hears its name spoken in the dark. Above the crowd, a strip of salvaged LED panels flickered from the day's ration schedule to a block of harsh white text. Quality alert, turbidity breach, hold distribution, await verified bulletin. Elias Cade stood on the second-floor catwalk that ran along the silent tower's intake room, looking down through reinforced glass at the basin where the city's people queued with dented canisters and cracked jugs. From here, the line was a geometry problem. Angles and distances, pressure points, choke points. From down there, it was thirst wearing human faces. A woman near the front pressed her ration card to the scanner again, harder, as if force could make the machine forgive. "Please," she said, not to the scanner but to the man behind it. "It's my kids. I'm on the list. I'm on the list." The clerk didn't look up. His stamp hovered, uncertain, above the ledger, like a guillotine waiting for permission to fall. "The code's invalid," he said. "No match. Step aside." "It's not invalid. It's—" She held up a second card, edges peeled, ink worn pale. "It's just old." "Step aside," the clerk repeated, voice tightened by the presence of people behind her. A ripple of impatience ran through the line. Two Iron Gate militia in patched armor shifted their weight at the barricade, hands near batons, eyes flicking to the water station doors as if the doors might become enemies. They weren't acting yet. They were waiting for authorization to exist. On the far side of the concourse, a Clearwater Directorate engineer argued with a silent tower runner over a clipboard. Elias didn't need to hear the words to know the shape of them. Clearwater wanted the plant reopened. Now, loudly, decisively. Iron Gate wanted the crowd moved. Now, forcibly, decisively. Both wanted the silent tower to say it first. A thin old man with a mildewed scarf around his neck let out a wet cough that sounded too deep for his body. He swayed, one hand clamped around the handle of his canister, the other searching for the air the way a drowning man searches for a surface he's never seen. Someone behind him shoved to keep their place. The old man's knees buckled. His canister hit the floor with a hollow clang, rolling and spilling nothing, only the stale smell of metal. He went down in slow motion, scarf slipping, cheek striking the concrete. The line shuddered. One person stepped back, then another stepped forward, and suddenly the rules of order were negotiating with gravity. "Hey, hey!" a voice barked. "Back up!" The militia pushed into the edge of the crowd, not to help the man, but to contain the shape of the panic. The clerk finally looked up, eyes wide, stamp forgotten. The woman with the invalid code stared at the old man as if his collapse had been her sentence too. Elias watched it all without moving. He felt, as he always did at moments like this, the city's dependence on sound, the way a single verified phrase could turn hunger into patience, fear into compliance. A silent prompt blinked on his console. Issue bulletin? Clearwater requesting statement. Iron Gate requesting crowd control advisory. He placed his fingertips on the microphone switch and waited half a breath longer than a human would, just enough to let the panic rise to the edge of becoming its own authority. Then he flipped the switch. His voice left the silent tower in a clean, measured stream, stripped of warmth, stripped of apology. "This is a verified public bulletin from the Silent Tower archive," he said. "All districts will hold distribution. Repeat, hold distribution. Do not attempt forced access to purification gates. Medical assistance is being routed to Basin Station Q1. Below, heads tilted up, as if his words were a rope tossed into a dark well. Ration codes remain valid, Elias continued, and he felt the crowd's collective breath pause on the word valid. Any scan mismatch will be reviewed at Verification Desk B during the next window. The next distribution window will be issued at 1400 hours pending quality confirmation. He let the schedule do what schedules always did, replace emotion with numbers. Until then, he finished, maintain your assigned queue markers. Iron Gate units will preserve passage lanes. Clearwater units will continue diagnostic protocols. Further instructions will follow only under verified seal. He cut the mic. For a moment, the concourse held, suspended between chaos and compliance. A runner sprinted toward the fallen old man with a medical kit. The woman with the invalid code clutched her cards against her chest like talismans. Elias stared at the LED panel where turbidity breach still glared. In the quiet behind the glass, his console showed the calibration baseline, an invisible line the city mistook for truth. He had shifted it just enough, not enough to be seen as sabotage, enough to make confirmation impossible, a small change in a number, a large change in a city. He turned away from the window, already hearing in his mind the next arguments that would arrive with the next request for a verified statement. And he felt nothing that could be mistaken for guilt. The concourse didn't explode after the bulletin, it reorganized. That was the Silent Tower's real craft, not calming fear, redirecting it into lanes, windows, and paperwork. Within minutes, the line at Basin Station Q1 broke into smaller lines with smaller reasons. Families clustered around painted markers. A pair of Iron Gate militia dragged a steel barrier into place and pretended it had always been there. Elias walked the inner corridor above them, boots quiet on grating. The Silent Tower wasn't a tower in any architectural sense. It was an old signal hub, rebuilt into a spine of rooms. Intake, verification, archive, broadcast, concrete and cable. The air smelled of dust, warmed by machines that should have died years ago. A runner fell in beside him, breathless. Desk B is already full. They're waving cards like it's proof of life. It is, Elias said, and kept walking. Verification Desk B sat behind a reinforced window, a narrow throat between the crowd and whatever the city still called legitimacy. Through the glass, a clerk took ration cards one by one, scanning barcodes that had been reprinted so many times the ink looked bruised. When a card failed to register, the clerk didn't argue. He stamped a rejection code and slid it back. The stamp mattered more than the clerk. Elias had seen people curse a man and still kiss the paper he handed them if it bore the right seal. On the wall behind the desk, the day's distribution schedule hung like scripture. Window 1, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Window 2, 12 p.m. to 2 p.m. Window 3, 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Now, under each window, someone had chalked a single word in block letters. Hold. The crowd treated that word the way it treated weather. Something no one could fight, only prepare for. Preparation looked like hoarding. It looked like bargaining. It looked like hunger turning into commerce. At the edge of the concourse, under the shadow of a collapsed escalator, a thin man in a patched coat opened his palm to reveal 3 paper chits. Old ration stubs with fresh ink over the original dates. Counterfeit. Not even good counterfeit. But the woman facing him stared at them like they were clean water. 2 for 1, the thin man whispered. I can get you in the next window. Verified. The word verified had become a kind of narcotic. Elias watched the exchange without expression. The thin man had no authority, no seal, no access to the system, yet he traded in the city's faith as easily as if he'd mined it himself. A Clearwater technician pushed through the crowd, shoulder patch stained with disinfectant, shouting about sensor faults and calibration drift. A militia sergeant blocked him with an open hand. Plants sealed, the sergeant said. Orders. From who? The technician snapped. From you? The sergeant's eyes flicked toward the Silent Tower window as if the answer was hanging there in LED text. Elias turned away before the argument could become an incident that required a second bulletin. He didn't like repeating himself. Repetition created angles. Angles created questions. Inside the intake room, the screen still held the same white accusation. Turbidity breach. Lines of data crawled beneath it. Flow rate, particulate count, chlorine remnants measured in decimals too small to feel and too large to ignore. Lena Price sat at the far console with a headset around her neck, hair pinned back with a piece of wire. She looked up as Elias entered, then quickly back down, as if eye contact might be interpreted as a request. Crowd settling, she said. Her voice was careful, neutral. It was the voice of someone who'd learned the safest emotion in Silt Hollow was none. How long until Clearwater stops asking for a statement and starts demanding one? Elias asked. Lena's mouth twitched. It wasn't a smile. They're already demanding. They just say request, because the word makes them feel civilized. On the main display, the calibration baseline sat in a quiet panel, an invisible threshold that decided whether the city drank or didn't. To anyone else, it was math. To Elias, it was governance. He didn't touch it now. He didn't need to. The baseline had been nudged earlier, in a window of minutes when no one was watching and everyone was trusting. A fraction of a unit. A minor correction, filed under routine maintenance. A small change in a number. A large change in a city. A new notification slid into view on his console, stamped with Clearwater's header. Lab submission status. Priority reference sample chain. Review required. Elias clicked. The document that opened was formatted like a confession. Timestamps, custody fields, signatures, a chain of custody log for the reference samples that proved the sensors were telling the truth. In Silt Hollow, truth required witnesses. One line was highlighted in red. Chain interruption, unverified handoff reference, chain invalid. Below it, the conclusion arrived with bureaucratic indifference. Per Clearwater Protocol 4.9, distribution must remain suspended until reference chain integrity is restored and recertified. Elias read it once, then again, not because he hadn't understood, but because he appreciated the elegance. The system didn't accuse him. It accused itself. An unverified handoff, a missing signature, a gap where a seal should have been. He leaned back in his chair and listened faintly to the noise of the concourse through the thick walls, the murmur of thousands of people translating thirst into bargaining. Lena waited, eyes on him now. "So we hold," she said, more statement than question. Elias nodded. "We hold." He forwarded the report to the distribution queue managers, to Iron Gate Command, to Clearwater leadership, every message stamped with the Silent Tower's quiet authority. Then he opened a blank bulletin draft and let the cursor blink like a heartbeat. Outside, people prayed with their hands open. Inside, Elias watched the city kneel to a red highlighted line of text. Reference chain. Invalid. And for the first time since the alert sounded, Silt Hollow had something it mistook for certainty. The council chamber was not a room built for governance. It was a former maintenance bay where someone had bolted a table to the floor and called it stability. The table was steel, scarred by old tools and new knives. A single strip light hung above it, buzzing with an insect-like patience. On one wall, a map of Silt Hollow had been painted in white lines. Districts, corridors, choke points. The purification plant marked with a neat square, like a promise. Elias Cade arrived first, as he usually did. Not because he cared about punctuality, but because the first 10 seconds of a meeting told you what everyone acted like they owned. He set his slate down, opened a blank minutes file, and placed a small recorder beside it. Silent Tower property, stamped with the archive's seal. The recorder did not intimidate people. It reassured them. It meant that whatever they said would become official, and official things had weight in Silt Hollow. Footsteps approached from opposite corridors. Marion Hale entered with 2 Clearwater engineers behind her, both carrying binders like shields. Hale was in her late 40s, hair pulled back tight enough to make the skin at her temples shine. Her hands smelled faintly of disinfectant, even from across the table. She did not look at Elias first. She looked at the map, then at the table, then at the recorder, as if checking for flaws in a system she didn't control. Captain Rowan Vale arrived a breath later, Iron Gate to the bone. His militia vest was patched in 3 places and cleaned in none. He carried no rifle in the chamber, an old agreement, a fragile courtesy. But the baton at his hip might as well have been a constitution. 2 of his people waited outside the door, visible through the narrow window slit like a warning. Hale spoke before anyone sat. "This suspension cannot continue," she said, voice clipped clean. "You're turning the basin into a marketplace for counterfeit ration codes." Vale's eyes flicked toward Elias, then back to Hale. "I'm turning it into a place where people don't tear each other apart. Your technicians lost control of the plant." "We did not lose control," Hale snapped. "We halted distribution under protocol. That is not loss. That is discipline." Vale pulled out a folded sheet and slapped it on the table. The paper trembled once, then settled. "Discipline doesn't stop hunger," he said. "This does." He tapped the sheet. "Gate restriction order, 2 barricades, 1 passage lane. We control movement. We control panic." Hale's mouth tightened. "You will not place Iron Gate inside purification operations. You do not have that authority." Vale leaned back as if amused by the concept of authority. "Then who does? Right now, the only thing anyone listens to is the silent tower. A voice over the speakers and a stamp on a bulletin. Not your numbers." Elias watched Hale's expression shift. Not into anger, exactly, but into a kind of technical offense, like someone had called her instrument superstition. He let the silence stretch long enough to become uncomfortable, but not long enough to become dangerous. Timing was another form of seal. "Let's start with what we can state as fact," Elias said, calm as a flat line. He did not look at Vale when he said it, nor at Hale. He looked at his slate, as if the slate were the only honest thing in the room. Hale exhaled through her nose. "Fact, sensor arrays registered a turbidity breach." "Fact," Elias agreed. "Fact, the reference sample chain is invalid." Hale's head snapped toward him. "You saw the report." "I received it," Elias said, "as Silent Tower is required to. The chain of custody log shows an unverified handoff." One of Hale's engineers shifted, bristling. Hale held up a hand without looking back. Her control over her people was physical, practiced. "The handoff can be audited," she said. "We can re-establish the chain and recertify within hours. If Iron Gate stops interfering with movement—" Vale snorted. "Hours? You think the basin has hours?" Hale pushed a binder forward, sliding it across the table like a blade. "Protocol 4.9. In case of quality breach, distribution remains suspended until reference chain integrity is restored and recertified." Vale didn't touch the binder. He didn't need to. He knew the trick of written policy. It only mattered when someone had the power to enforce it. "And who certifies the recertification?" he asked. "You?" Hale's jaw worked once. "Clearwater certifies water. That is our function." Vale tilted his head. "And the people trust you?" Hale's eyes hardened. "They drink because they have no choice." Elias watched that sentence land in the room like a dropped tool. Loud, honest, and not helpful. He could see the shape of the next hours if they continued like this. Hale would retreat into procedures. Vale would press for emergency authority. The basin would fill with rumors, then bodies. The city would demand certainty, and certainty would be sold to whoever sounded most absolute. Elias turned his slate slightly so both could see the header of the report he'd pulled up. He did not show them the whole chain of custody log. He showed them the red line that mattered. Reference chain invalid. Hale stared as if the text were a personal insult. Vale stared as if it were an opportunity. "This," Elias said softly, "is the problem you cannot solve with force, and you cannot solve with engineering alone. Not because the plant cannot be repaired. Because legitimacy is the bottleneck." Vale's lips curved, faint. "So you admit it." "I'm describing it," Elias corrected. Hale's voice sharpened. "If Silent Tower would issue a statement confirming our recertification, and if Silent Tower issues a statement authorizing Iron Gate crowd control," Vale cut in, "we can clear the basin, secure the plant, and stop the spread of—" He glanced at Hale's binder as if the word tasted bad. "Protocol." Elias let them talk over each other for 3 sentences, just long enough for both to hear how desperate they sounded. Then he raised his hand. Not high, not dramatic, just enough. Both stopped. They stopped because they had been trained to stop when the bulletins stopped. That training was older than either faction. "What you are asking me to do," Elias said, "is to pick a side." Hale's eyes narrowed. "We are asking you to verify the truth." Vale's gaze was flat. "We're asking you to keep the city from turning on us." Both statements were accurate. Elias appreciated that, the way you appreciated a clean diagnosis. "There is a third option," Elias said. He tapped his slate, and a simple framework appeared on the small wall monitor. 3 columns, 3 seals, 1 set of directives. Hale leaned forward despite herself. Vale didn't lean forward, but his attention did. "An interim accord," Elias said. "Not a transfer of authority, a verification structure." Clearwater certifies technical findings. Iron Gate executes physical security measures within defined limits. Silent Tower authenticates public directives only after receiving both inputs. Hale frowned. That makes you the gate. It makes me the ledger, Elias replied. Vale laughed once, quiet. Same thing. Elias ignored that. He continued as if he were reading out a maintenance checklist. 3 seals, he said. Water, force, signal. No single faction issues citywide orders alone. Bulletins are unified. Messaging is consistent. Panic reduces. Hale stared at the columns, her eyes moving down the lines as if tallying losses and gains. Vale's eyes narrowed. And if Clearwater lies? Elias met neither accusation with denial. Denial was for people who needed to be believed emotionally. The system logs everything, he said. Every directive, every handoff, every timestamp. If one party breaks terms, the record shows it. He let the recorder's red light blink. It blinked like a metronome, like a heartbeat, like a warning. Vale's fingers drummed once on the table. Hale's knuckles whitened around her binder. In that moment, Elias saw their weaknesses clearly. Hale's hands tightening around her binder whenever protocol was questioned, and Vale's fingers drumming on the table whenever limits were mentioned. Both were wrong. Both were useful. Hale spoke first, wary. An accord is paper. Paper is what this city runs on, Elias said. Stamps, codes, schedules, not trust, not goodwill. He watched it land, Hale's mouth tightening, her eyes turning hard. He watched Vale's attention sharpen in a way that looked too pleased. I will draft the framework, Elias said, already writing the title into his minutes file as if it were inevitable. We will meet again within the hour to refine terms. Until then, Silent Tower maintains the hold under Protocol 4.9. Clearwater continues diagnostics. Iron Gate maintains external passage lanes only. No entry into purification operations without verified directive. Vale's nostrils flared, Hale's eyes sharpened. They both wanted to argue, they both needed to agree. Elias saved the minutes, stamped them with the archive seal, and stood. As he left the chamber, he heard Hale and Vale speak at the same time again. 2 competing definitions of safety. Elias walked the corridor back toward the Silent Tower intake room, already assembling the next document in his mind. Not because he believed paper could save them, because he knew paper could rule them. The first rumor moved through Silt Hollow the way smoke moved through old tunnels. Quiet at the start, then everywhere at once. Elias heard it before anyone filed a request. Not from the concourse, not from Clearwater's clipped memos or Iron Gate's blunt advisories. He heard it in the thin hiss between frequencies, a breath that shouldn't have been there, threaded into the city's ambient audio like a stitch. Lena Price was the one who caught it on the diagnostic monitor. She leaned toward the waveform, eyes narrowing, and for the first time since the alert, her voice held a note of something human. Someone's riding our relay. Elias crossed the intake room and looked at the spectrum analyzer. A narrow spike flickered where no spike belonged. Too clean, too confident, like a signature. The Silent Tower's relay wasn't supposed to accept outside signal without handshake keys. Supposed to was a phrase that had died with the old world. A second later, the spike widened. The room's overhead speaker, used for internal routing and emergency cues, crackled, then resolved into a voice that wasn't Elias's. Not loud, not theatrical, just intimate enough to feel like it belonged in your ear. Listen, the voice said, this isn't a quality breach, it's a ration breach. Lena's hand flew to the mute switch. Elias stopped her with 2 fingers raised. Not dramatic. Just enough. She froze, gaze flicking to him for permission the way the city did. The voice continued steady as a ledger. Clearwater Directorate is withholding Azure cores from Vault K3. I'm looking at the ledger line right now. Form W9C, batch code AZ17B, signed off at 1920 hours 2 days ago. Not consumed, not issued, not regenerated, parked. Elias felt something shift inside him, not surprise exactly. Recognition. The detail wasn't the kind of detail a desperate person invented. The form number was real. The batch code format was real. Even the phrasing, issued, consumed, regenerated, was plant language, Clearwater language. He watched Lena's face tighten as she realized the same thing. The voice took a breath and went on. They tell you reference chain invalid. They tell you protocol. They tell you to wait for verified seal. But the Azure cores are there. They can fix this tonight. They choose not to. Static washed over the last word, then the transmission cut out as abruptly as it had arrived. The analyzer spike collapsed into the background hiss, like a knife withdrawn from flesh without leaving a visible wound. For a long moment, the intake room was silent except for the hum of machines. Then the city answered. Not with a riot. Not yet. With the sound of hundreds of people finding a sentence that explained their fear. In the concourse below, voices rose and braided into a single ugly concept that didn't require proof, only repetition. Withholding. Elias turned to the glass and looked down. He couldn't hear every word, but he could read mouths, postures, the way bodies angled toward the plant doors as if the doors were suddenly the only honest thing left. A man in the basin lifted his canister over his head like a symbol. Another pointed toward a Clearwater patch and shouted. A group near the barricade started chanting something too fragmented to be a chant and too synchronized to be a conversation. Lena swallowed. That form number. I know, Elias said. On his console, the message queue began to fill, as if someone had opened a valve. Clearwater. Unauthorized transmission. Request immediate denial. Irongate. Confirm source. Authorized crowd control advisory. Clearwater. Again. The claim is false. Issue correction under seal. Elias didn't open any of them right away. He watched the concourse instead, watched the way anger walked on two legs and changed the shape of the line. Trust, he thought, was a finite supply. It didn't vanish, it was redistributed. Lena kept her eyes on the analyzer. We can trace the origin, she said, as if offering him a lifeline. Elias glanced at the preliminary location estimate. The algorithm drew a soft circle on the map, imprecise, cautious, the way honest data always was. The circle sat uncomfortably close to the silent tower's own backbone. Could be reflection, Lena said quickly, too quickly. Old metal, tunnel bends. It doesn't mean... It means it sounds plausible, Elias replied. Plausibility was the currency that bought belief when water ran out. He opened a blank bulletin draft. The cursor blinked, patient and obedient. Lena waited for him to type the denial Clearwater wanted. A clean refutation, a stamped truth, the kind of message that tried to push a rumor back into the dark. Instead, Elias wrote something colder. Unverified transmission detected. No claims are confirmed without verified seal. All districts maintain Q markers. Do not approach purification gates. Further instructions to follow under archive authentication. He read it once, then routed it through the internal approval channel without the word false anywhere in it. Lena's eyebrows rose. You're not going to... Deny it? Elias finished for her. He stood, walked to the microphone switch, and stared through the reinforced glass at the basin. The crowd was not calm, but it was waiting to be told what reality was allowed to be. He flipped the switch. This is a verified public bulletin from the Silent Tower archive, he said, voice smooth as the steel table in the council bay. An unverified transmission has been detected. No claims are recognized as fact without verified seal. Maintain your assigned Q markers. Do not approach purification gates. Any further instructions will follow under archive authentication. He cut the mic. Down below, a few faces twisted with frustration, others softened with relief. The bulletin didn't erase the rumor, it gave the rumor a frame to live inside. Elias returned to his console and watched the message queue continue to swell. Clearwater would rage, Iron Gate would posture, the city would repeat the batch code, AZ-17B, as if speaking it could summon water. He looked again at the origin circle pulsing near the silent tower. Then he closed the trace window without saving it to the public log. The rumor didn't need his help to travel now. It had legs. All it needed from him was silence. Quinn Mercer didn't file a request. He sent a runner with no insignia and a message written in the careful, impersonal hand of someone trying to look harmless. Need 5 minutes. Not through official channels. Your level. Elias read it once, then folded it into a neat square and slid it beneath the edge of his console, as if hiding it from the room itself. Lena was at the far station, pretending not to watch. Pretending was another kind of obedience. Keep the relay on scan, Elias said. Lena nodded too quickly. If Clearwater calls again, they will, Elias said, and walked out. The silent tower had places that were not on any map. Narrow service corridors behind archival racks. Dead stairwells sealed by rusted doors. Spaces built for cables, repurposed for conversations that couldn't be recorded. Quinn waited in one of those spaces, a maintenance alcove where old conduit ran like veins along the ceiling. He wore Clearwater grey, but without the usual disinfectant stains. His hair was combed. His boots were clean enough to be an accusation. He smiled when Elias appeared, as if they were allies who'd agreed to meet, rather than strangers deciding whether to become enemies. Archivist, Quinn said softly. He didn't say Elias's name. Names were too direct. Titles were safer. Elias stopped just inside the alcove, leaving the corridor behind him open. Escape routes were important when people smiled. Deputy Mercer, Elias replied. Quinn's smile widened by a fraction. You know who I am. I know who signs the paperwork, Elias said. Often that's more useful. Quinn made a small sound that might have been a laugh if he'd been built for warmth. He leaned back against the conduit as though the metal had accepted him. You heard it, he said. It wasn't a question. The transmission. Everyone heard it, Elias said, and everyone believed it. Quinn's voice was quiet, almost tender, as if describing an injury. Because it wasn't the kind of lie people tell when they're desperate. It had teeth, form numbers, batch codes, vault designation. Elias watched Quinn carefully. Quinn spoke like a man testing a blade by running his thumb along the edge, lightly, as if he didn't mind bleeding. What do you want? Elias asked. Quinn hesitated just long enough to suggest he didn't want this, not really. Then he stepped forward. Marion Hale is going to lose control, he said, not because she's wrong about protocol, because she's married to it. She thinks paperwork is authority. She forgets authority is consent. Elias said nothing. Quinn took the silence as permission. She'll hold the line, Quinn continued, and the line will break. Iron Gate will restore order. Vale will put boots inside purification operations and call it temporary. Hale will call it a coup. The city will call it water. You're describing a prediction, Elias said, not a proposal. Quinn's eyes sharpened, pleased. Fine, here's the proposal. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thin folder, edges worn from being handled too often. He didn't offer it immediately. He let Elias see it. The folder bore Clearwater's internal stamp, technical, official, real. Vault K3, Quinn said, Azure Core Reserve. Elias's gaze didn't change, but something in the air did. Names carried weight, vault designations carried options. People think Hale holds the key, Quinn said. She doesn't, not in the way that matters. He tapped the folder with 2 fingers. On paper, the custodian is me, Quinn said, not because I'm special, because I'm useful. Hale likes delegating risk downward. It keeps her hands clean. Elias looked at the folder. He did not reach for it. Are you telling me you can open K3? Elias asked. I'm telling you the system believes I can, Quinn replied. And in Silt Hollow, belief is half the mechanism. He let that sit, then added softer, the other half is your seal. Elias tilted his head slightly. My seal doesn't open vaults. Quinn's smile returned, practiced. No, it makes opening vaults acceptable. Outside the alcove, somewhere in the concourse, a shout rose and fell like a wave against concrete. The city was restless. It would be worse by night. Quinn stepped closer, lowering his voice. Hale will dig in, he said. Vale will push. The archive will be asked to pick a side. You already know that. I'm offering you a way to avoid choosing between them. Elias's eyes stayed on Quinn, flat and patient. And what do you get? Elias asked. Quinn's shoulders lifted in a shallow shrug. A directorate that survives. A leadership structure that can adapt. Someone at the top who understands optics as well as chemistry. He didn't say me out loud. He didn't have to. Elias considered Quinn the way he considered a new protocol, by searching for what it hid, not what it claimed. Quinn was ambitious, yes, but ambition was not the danger. The danger was that Quinn's ambition came wrapped in a plausible rescue. What you're asking, Elias said, is for the silent tower to lend legitimacy to a personnel change. Quinn's eyes flickered. I'm asking you to stay above the fight. There is no above, Elias said calmly, only records. Quinn held his breath, waiting for the line that mattered. Elias let the pause stretch, just enough to make Quinn feel the edge of uncertainty, not enough to make him retreat. The archive authenticates stability, Elias said at last. If a stable solution presents itself, through documented procedure, then it will receive the treatment stability deserves. Quinn exhaled, the smallest release. He heard what he wanted to hear. So the door's not closed, Quinn said. The door is a door, Elias replied. It opens when the right seals align. Quinn nodded, satisfied, and slid the folder back into his jacket like a secret that had become currency. As soon as Hale loses the room, he said, Vale will move. You'll be asked to bless it. I'm simply giving you another option. Elias watched Quinn step away into the corridor's dim light, already rehearsing how he would look when the city demanded someone to blame. When Quinn was gone, Elias remained a moment longer in the alcove, listening to the distant, restless noise of Silt Hollow. On paper, Mercer held a key. In practice, Elias now held Mercer. The worst hours in Silt Hollow were not the ones when people fought. They were the ones when people waited, when the city's rules still existed, but not clearly enough to obey. Confusion was hunger's most efficient weapon. Elias Cade watched it build from the silent tower's concourse glass as the clock approached 1200, the beginning of what the old schedule still called Window 2. In the early days, the second window had been merciful. Midday distribution, enough to carry families through the afternoon. Now it was a pressure point. Everyone knew it. Everyone planned around it. Everyone could be broken by it. The LED panels above Basin Station changed as they always did. Flicker, stabilize, announce. Today they announced something that sounded complete until you tried to follow it. Distribution Window 2. Districts C/D/EQ. Rotation C then EC Bulletin for code update. The last line mattered. The last line was poison. Down below, people leaned toward the nearest printed bulletin board. A sheet under plastic, stamped with the silent tower seal, corners curling. It had been updated recently, but recently in Silt Hollow meant after someone had already made a plan. The bulletin's language was careful, almost polite. Code update, notice. District E, present code E12, replacing E11. For Window 2, District C, present code C07 as issued District D, hold pending recertification. It was the kind of update that looked harmless to anyone who didn't have children waiting behind them with empty canisters. One digit, one replacement. Routine. But District E hadn't received E12. Not in their hands, not in their pockets. Not in the cheap laminated sleeves people wore around their necks like saints wore bones. They arrived with E11. They arrived on time. They arrived as if the schedule was still a law they could live under. The first rejection happened at the scanner and didn't sound like a fight. Just a sharp little beep, repeated. A woman lifted her card, frowned at it, and tried again. The clerk behind the desk shook his head without meeting her eyes. Wrong code, he said. Step aside. What do you mean wrong? She snapped, voice cracking on the edge of dignity. We were told. E12, the clerk said, tapping the bulletin under plastic like it was scripture. It's on the board. Step aside. More beeps, more rejections. The line tightened. A man from District C, holding a C07 card, stepped forward and was scanned through. His relief was visible, immediate. He tried to move away quickly, as if success could be stolen by proximity to the unsuccessful. Someone from District E reached out and grabbed his sleeve. No, they said. No, wait, we were here. We're next. The man jerked free, eyes wide with guilt and fear. I'm sorry, he said, and it was honest and useless. He walked faster. The crowd started to tilt, not as a single movement, but as a series of small compensations, the way a ship lists before it tips. People pressed closer to the barricade, shoulders met shoulders, voices overlapped until they became a single sound made of different kinds of desperation. Elias could see the logic forming in their faces. Not the truth, logic. If the codes were wrong, someone had made them wrong. If someone had made them wrong, it was on purpose. If it was on purpose, it was theft. Behind the barricade, Iron Gate militia shifted into position without being told. Their body language changed from watchful to preemptive. A baton was unhooked. A hand rested on a zip-tie cuff. Lena Price's voice came through Elias's earpiece, restrained and tense. Desk B is reporting a surge. District E says they never got E12. They didn't, Elias said. You changed the bulletin, Lena asked before she could stop herself. Elias didn't answer. Silence was cleaner than reassurance. Below, the first shove became a shove back, then a shove forward. Then two people tripped over the same painted marker, and the marker ceased to mean anything. A canister went down and rolled, clanging, and that sound was enough to unhook something in the crowd. A Clearwater technician tried to push toward the scanner line, shouting above the noise. "This is a distribution error. Listen, this is a—" An Iron Gate sergeant blocked him, palm out. "Back," the sergeant ordered. "I need to see the desk logs," the technician snapped. "This is a schedule slip. This is on the bulletin." "Back," the sergeant repeated, and the word became a warning. Then Captain Rowan Vale arrived. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. He walked into the basin as if the city's fear owed him rent. Two militia flanked him, not as protection, but as punctuation. "Clear the passage lane," Vale said, voice carrying without strain. "Move the barricade 2 meters. Keep the doors sealed." A clerk near the desk looked up, searching for permission. Vale gave it with a glance. A woman from District E stepped forward, face wet with sweat and fury. "You can't do this," she said. "Our kids. Our—" Vale's eyes moved past her to the mass behind her. He didn't see her. He saw the shape she belonged to. "You're out of schedule," he said. "We're not out of schedule," someone screamed from behind. "They changed the codes." Vale turned slightly and nodded to his sergeant. "Detain the agitators," he said. "We keep order first. We fix paperwork after." The sergeant pulled out a stack of plastic cuffs. It didn't matter that Vale hadn't said arrest. In Silt Hollow, the words you chose were less important than the seal that followed them. A young man, too thin, too angry, too loud, shouted again, and a militia hand seized his arm. The crowd surged, and in that surge, fear stopped being individual and became communal. Elias felt the moment the city reached for violence, the way a drowning person reached for air. He left the intake room and took the spiral stair down to the Silent Tower's public-facing booth, where the microphone sat behind a pane of scratched glass. The booth was a confessional with a wire instead of a priest. His console chimed with an incoming document request, stamped Iron Gate, emergency. He opened it, a single-page directive, short, blunt, effective. Iron Gate Order IG 22. Subject, Basin Station. Crowd stabilization measures, temporary gate lockdown, queue hold, detain disruptors. Effective immediate signatory, Captain Rowan Vale. The signature line was real, the format was correct. The order had the kind of simplicity people mistook for strength. Elias stared at it for 2 seconds, then saved it to the archive, not publicly, not yet, but with the timestamp intact, preserved in the system that would later decide what had happened. The city below was a single animal now, pressed against steel and rules and heat. Lena's voice returned, strained. "Elias, Vale's locking the basin." "I know," Elias said. "What do we do?" Elias looked at the LED panels. He looked at the bulletin board. He looked at the stamp on his own console, the quiet authority of authentication. He opened a new bulletin draft and did what he always did when other people tried to solve chaos with force. He solved it with text. He keyed in a revised schedule that made the error disappear without admitting it had existed. Verified public bulletin, immediate update distribution. Window 2, adjustment, District E, temporary acceptance of E. 11 and a 12 at Desk B, District C, hold 15 minutes for passage. Clearance District D, continues hold pending recertification Iron Gate. Maintain passage lanes. No detentions without verified cause. Further updates under archive seal only. He sent it to the panels, then flipped the microphone. This is a verified public bulletin from the Silent Tower archive, Elias said, voice flat and exact. Distribution window 2 is adjusted. District E will be processed under temporary dual code acceptance at verification desk B. Repeat, E11 and E12 will be accepted. Maintain your queue markers. Iron gate units will preserve passage lanes. No detentions will proceed without verified cause under archive seal. He cut the mic. For a heartbeat, nothing changed. Then everything did. The beeps at the scanner changed pitch as E11 cards began to pass. The woman at the front stopped arguing long enough to breathe. The young man in the militia's grip froze as if someone had switched gravity. A few people still shouted, but their shouts lost their audience. Vale's head lifted, slow, like a man hearing a door lock from the other side. He looked up toward the Silent Tower booth, eyes narrow. He didn't like being corrected in public. He liked it less when the correction sounded like law. The sergeant hesitated with cuffs in hand, suddenly uncertain whether the captain's order outranked the archive's bulletin. Uncertainty was the Silent Tower's favorite kind of leverage. Elias watched the crowd decompress. Not calm, not happy, but reorganized into something survivable. He watched Iron Gate step back half a pace because stepping forward now would look like disobedience to the only voice the city had agreed to treat as truth. Behind the glass, Elias saved the bulletin and, without expression, attached Vale's IG-22 order to the internal minutes file. No one in the basin knew that a single page of text with a signature had just become evidence. They only knew, with the blunt relief of the nearly thirsty, that a verified bulletin had arrived and the world had snapped back into lines. In Silt Hollow, order did not come from mercy. It came from whoever controlled the words that people were allowed to obey. The hold didn't end after Window 2. It spread. By late afternoon, Silt Hollow had become a city living between bulletins, between what it had been told and what it feared would be said next. The queues reformed, thinner but more volatile. The counterfeiters multiplied. People who had never spoken to each other began trading information like currency. Which desk accepted which code? Which militia sergeant could be bribed? Which corridor was being watched? Elias Cade watched the data in the Silent Tower intake room with the same calm he used to watch crowds, as patterns, not pleas. On his console, the internal log held Captain Rowan Vale's order, IG-22, time-stamped, signed, preserved. A single page that proved how quickly stabilization became detention when the city stopped understanding its own schedule. On a separate channel, Clearwater's requests had shifted in tone. They still used the word request, but the punctuation had grown sharper. Clearwater, demand clarification on dual code acceptance. Update created confusion. Clearwater, unauthorized transmission continues to incite. Issue denial. Clearwater, we will recertify. Need public confidence. Iron Gate's messages were shorter. Iron Gate, authorize plant secure. Iron Gate, crowd fear rising. Need emergency authority. Fear, authority, confidence. The same three words rotating through different mouths as if the city had only learned one language after the collapse. Lena Price set down a stack of printouts without speaking. Elias glanced at the top sheet. Flow rate steady, particulates hovering near the new baseline. Nothing dramatic enough to justify the violence the city was rehearsing. It's not getting worse, Lena said carefully. No, Elias replied, it's getting political. The summons arrived as a runner's knock on the intake room door. 2 taps, a pause, 1 tap. The pattern of a council call. Elias didn't look up from the screen when he said, "Tell them I'll attend in 5. Lena hesitated. "Both of them?" "Both," he said. He took his slate, his recorder, and a thin folder he'd drafted in the quiet hours between bulletins. The folder didn't look dangerous. It looked like paper. In Silt Hollow, that was the same thing. The council chamber smelled of old metal and new sweat. When Elias entered, Marion Hale was already there, standing as if sitting would imply compromise. 2 Clearwater engineers hovered behind her with binders and eyes that flinched at the word rumor. Captain Rowan Vale sat at the table, one boot planted forward, elbows wide, occupying more space than his body required. His militia waited outside, visible through the slit window, their silhouettes a constant suggestion. Hale spoke first, and her voice had the sharpness of someone who had been forced to defend competence to thirsty people. "You altered my distribution parameters," she said to Elias. "Dual code acceptance. That is not standard." "It was effective," Elias replied. "It trained them to expect exceptions," Hale snapped. "Exceptions become demands." Vale's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Exceptions become leverage." Hale's gaze cut toward him. "And leverage becomes a gun pointed at my plant." Vale didn't deny it. Denial was not his style. He slid a new document across the table toward Elias with 2 fingers. "Emergency Authority Petition," Vale said. "Iron Gate control of purification operations until the hold ends." Hale's hands curled into fists at her sides. "Absolutely not." Vale's eyes stayed on Elias. "Not operations, security, access, movement. Your people can do chemistry. My people keep them alive while they do it." "My people are alive because we follow protocol," Hale said, "because we don't invite armed men into a system built to purify." Vale leaned forward slightly. "Your protocol is why we're here." Hale's jaw clenched. Protocol 4.9 prevented contaminated water. It saved lives. "It delayed water," Vale said. "Delay is its own contamination." Elias watched them with the detached patience of someone listening to 2 instruments trying to tune themselves against each other. In Hale's clipped phrasing and the way her fingers kept returning to the binder, he read a faith that correctness should earn obedience. In Vale's posture, wide elbows, steady gaze, he read the opposite. Obedience was something you took, not something you won. Different doctrines, same mistake. They spoke as if the city belonged to them. The city belonged to whoever could speak and be believed. Outside the chamber, a distant rumble rolled through the concrete. Voices in the concourse, a restless crowd finding new reasons to gather. The rumor about Azure cores hadn't died. It had matured. People repeated Vault K3 with a reverence that made it feel real, regardless of whether it was. Hale's engineer opened a binder and pushed forward a page covered in graphs and neat signatures. "We can restore the reference chain," he said, trying to sound helpful. "We can re-establish custody, resample, recertify within hours," Vale cut in. "You keep saying hours as if hunger respects time." Hale rounded on him. "And you keep acting like force creates water." Vale's hand drifted toward the emergency petition. "Force creates quiet." "It creates bodies," Hale said. Vale's gaze held steady. "Bodies are quieter." Hale's face went pale, then furious. "This is exactly why the city fears you." "Good," Vale said. "Fear is how you keep a line." Elias let the moment hang just long enough for both to hear what the other had become. Then he set his recorder on the table and turned it on. The red light blinked once, and the room's temperature dropped by degrees that weren't physical. "Before this becomes performance," Elias said, "state your positions for the record." Vale's eyes narrowed. Hale's nostrils flared, but both spoke because the record was a kind of immortality and a kind of threat. Hale spoke first. "Clearwater retains operational control of the purification plant. Recertification proceeds per protocol. Iron Gate remains outside the plant perimeter." Vale followed. "Iron Gate assumes emergency security authority. We restrict access, control movement, and stabilize crowds. Clearwater operates under guard until distribution resumes." Elias nodded as if these were merely 2 proposals in a file. He tapped his slate, and the wall monitor flickered to life. Not with data, but with structure. 3 columns, 3 headings. Water, Clearwater Directorate Force, Iron Gate Militia Signal, Silent Tower Archive. Hale's eyes narrowed, Vale's attention sharpened. "An interim framework," Elias said, voice even. "Not a transfer of authority, a mechanism to prevent unilateral actions from igniting the concourse." Hale frowned. "You already proposed this. Paper." "Paper is how this city breathes," Elias replied. "Stamps, codes, bulletins. You don't have trust. You have compliance." Vale leaned back. "And you have the loudest stamp." Elias didn't correct him. He moved to the next page of the draft, and the monitor updated with bullet points. Clean, bureaucratic, hard to argue with because it looked like safety. Three-seal accord, Elias said. Clearwater certifies technical findings. Iron Gate executes defined security measures. Silent Tower authenticates public directives only when both inputs are logged. Hale's engineer leaned in despite himself. Defined limits? Elias tapped again. Iron Gate limits. No entry into purification operations without verified directive. Detention requires documented cause filed with archive. Passage lanes maintained. Barricade relocation requires notice. Vale's lips tightened. So you want to chain my hands? I want to chain your optics, Elias said. There's a difference. Vale's eyes flicked to the recorder, then to Hale, then back to Elias. He understood optics. He just preferred force. Hale's voice was sharp with suspicion. And what does Silent Tower gain? A unified message, Elias said. A reduction in rumor volatility. Fewer bodies, fewer emergency bulletins that sound like panic. That's not an answer, Hale said. Elias held her gaze. It's the only answer that matters. He turned the page again, and this time the heading was smaller, almost polite. A clause designed to look like common sense. Continuity. Clause. In the event of coordination interruption, communication failure, or schedule collapse, Silent Tower may issue provisional directives to preserve public order until full three-seal authentication resumes. Vale's eyebrows rose slightly. Hale's frown deepened. That gives you emergency power, Hale said. It gives the city a voice when yours are fighting, Elias replied. Hale started to object, but Vale lifted a hand. Provisional, Vale said, tasting the word. How long? Elias tapped the final section, the one written to sound like restraint while functioning like a latch. Renewal mechanism. Provisional directives expire every 24 hours unless renewed. Renewal occurs automatically if the reference chain remains unrestored. Provisional status ends only upon verified reference chain restored certification, logged and authenticated by Silent Tower. Hale stared at it, jaw tightening. You made the end condition dependent on your authentication. I made it dependent on verification, Elias said. The same principle you claim to value. Vale leaned forward, interest sharpening into calculation. 24 hours, he said. That's harmless. Hale shot him a look of disbelief. Harmless is not the same as safe. Vale shrugged. It stops the concourse from eating itself. Hale's engineer whispered something to her, likely about how a 24-hour provisional window could buy them time to repair the chain without Iron Gate barging into operations. Hale's eyes flicked across the clauses again, searching for the trap and finding only the problem she couldn't say out loud. Without the Silent Tower's seal, her truth meant nothing to the people. Elias watched her swallow that. Vale tapped the table once, impatient. If this keeps my men from being painted as villains while we do what needs to be done, he said, I can work with paper. Hale's voice was colder now, controlled. I will not sign away Clearwater's authority. You won't, Elias said. You will document it. You will protect it with structure instead of hoping the city remembers your intentions. Silence stretched. Outside, the distant crowd noise rose, then fell like a warning the city kept rehearsing. Finally, Hale spoke carefully. Draft the full accord. Define the limits. Define the certification steps. Vale nodded once. Bring it back tonight. I want my emergency authority clarified. Elias saved the draft on his slate and did not smile. He only nodded, as if he were agreeing to a routine maintenance schedule. Within the hour, he said. He stood, gathered his recorder, and left them in the chamber with their binders and petitions, and fear. Two factions staring at a document that looked to both of them like a compromise. To Elias, it looked like a door. And because it promised only 24 hours at a time, it looked harmless enough for them to start walking toward it. Elias did not draft the accord in the council chamber. He drafted it where the city's belief lived, in the Silent Tower's archive room, between shelves of stamped minutes and laminated schedules, where paper outlasted people and rules outlasted intent. He wrote in the language Silt Hollow trusted. Headings, clauses, timestamps, words that sounded like they belonged to no one. Lena Price watched him assemble the document the way a technician watched a pressure gauge climb, without interrupting, but ready to flinch. "You're really doing it," she said finally. "I'm documenting it," Elias replied. She didn't argue the difference. People who survived here learned not to argue semantics with someone holding the microphone. By the time the draft was complete, it looked harmless. It looked like restraint. 3-seal accord, interim. Scope, quality hold coordination, distribution stabilization, unified directives. Seals, Clearwater, water, Iron Gate, force, silent tower, signal. Continuity, provisional directives permitted under defined interruption conditions. Renewal, 24-hour expiry with conditional extension until reference chain restored. He printed 2 copies anyway. In Silt Hollow, a printed page carried a gravity a screen never did. Then he started the second part of the work, selling truth in halves. He met Captain Rowan Vale first, not in the council chamber, but in Iron Gate's corridor office near the basin, close enough that the smell of sweat and metal and old disinfectant felt permanent. 2 militia stood outside the door. Vale waved them off with a glance when Elias arrived. "Archivist," Vale said, not standing. His eyes were tired, but his posture was a weapon that didn't rust. Elias set a folder on the desk. Not the accord yet, something smaller. "A record extract," Elias said. Vale's gaze dropped to the folder with faint impatience. "If this is another protocol lecture—" "It's not," Elias said. He opened the folder and slid 1 page forward, then another, careful as if arranging evidence in a trial. The pages were ledger fragments, Clearwater internal forms and cross-reference indexes, each with a timestamp at the top and a neat chain of custody at the bottom. Elias hadn't forged them. He didn't need to. He'd only chosen which ones to show. Vale's eyes sharpened at the heading: Vault Access Log, K3 Custodian of Record. Mercer, Quinn Status, Access Restricted, Admin Hold Effective, 1842. Yesterday Authorization, Clearwater Internal. Vale's jaw tightened. "Mercer," he said, as if tasting the name for utility. Elias did not say Quinn had volunteered that fact in a dark maintenance alcove. He did not say the hold could be as mundane as optics or as deliberate as leverage. He let the paper imply intent. "This is not proof of hoarding," Elias said calmly, the way he might say a sensor reading was inconclusive. "It is proof of restriction." Vale leaned forward and tapped the log with 1 finger. Restriction during a waterhold is hoarding with better spelling. "It will read that way to the basin," Elias said. Vale's eyes flicked up. "You traced this." "I archived it," Elias corrected, "and I'm showing it to you because you're requesting emergency authority. If you take the plant by force while these restrictions exist, the city won't see rescue. They'll see protection of a theft." Vale's mouth twitched. "So you're telling me Clearwater is lying?" "I'm telling you Clearwater is vulnerable," Elias said, "and vulnerability is volatile." Vale stared at the log again, then back at Elias. "Why bring this to me?" Elias folded his hands. "Because you want to be inside the plant. Hale will call it a coup. The city will decide who to believe. If you move without a structure that looks lawful, you lose legitimacy. And once you lose legitimacy, you have only your batons." Vale's eyes stayed steady. "And if I have only batons?" "Then you create bodies," Elias said, and kept his tone flat. "Bodies are persuasive in the short term. In the long term, they are evidence." Vale's nostrils flared at that, but he didn't look away. He was not afraid of evidence. He was afraid of being trapped by it. Elias slid the accord forward at last. "This protects you," he said, "limits you publicly, legitimizes you privately. It gives the basin a single voice. It gives you defined measures you can call authorized." Vale read the first page without moving his lips. When he reached the continuity clause, his gaze paused. "Provisional directives," he said softly. "Only during interruption," Elias replied. "And interruption is?" Vale asked. Elias met his eyes. "A schedule collapse, a relay failure, coordination breakdown, the kind of chaos the basin is learning to manufacture." Vale's mouth curved in something like approval. 24 hours at a time," he said, glancing at the renewal mechanism. "That's a leash." It's a leash the city will accept, Elias said. Vale sat back, the chair creaking. Hale won't like this. She doesn't have to like it, Elias said. She has to sign it. Vale's eyes narrowed. And if she doesn't? Elias didn't answer. Answers were commitments. He offered only the next document in the sequence, the next inevitability. He left Iron Gate and went to Clearwater. Marion Hale received him in a sterile side office that smelled like boiled plastic and the sharp tang of chlorine. Her engineers were there again, clustered like anxious shadows. Hale didn't offer him a seat. You met Vale first, she said. Elias set his slate on her desk and opened a file. For the record, I am meeting both parties in sequence. Hale's eyes flicked to the recorder. Her mouth tightened, an expression Elias had learned to read as contempt for anything that didn't bend to being right. What is this? She asked. Elias slid one page toward her. Iron Gate Order, IG-22. Subject, Basin Station. Crowd stabilization, measures, temporary gate, lockdown, queue hold, detain disruptors. Effective 12:07, today. Signatory Captain, Rowan Vale Archive. Receipt, 12:08, Silent Tower. Hale's fingers tightened on the paper. He issued this. He requested authentication, Elias said. I did not authenticate detentions. But the order exists. It is time-stamped. One of Hale's engineers leaned in, face pale. Detain disruptors, during a quality hold. Hale's voice sharpened. This is exactly what I warned about. Elias turned the page, a list of Iron Gate logistics requests. Cuffs, barricade hardware, additional gate bolts. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic, just preparation. His posture is shifting, Elias said. Toward escalation. The basin is giving him justification. Hale glared at the documents as if glaring could sterilize them. I can restore the reference chain, she said. I can recertify. Then this ends. Elias nodded once. You can restore a chain. You cannot restore belief without a mechanism. Hale's gaze snapped up. And your mechanism requires my signature. My mechanism requires your seal, Elias corrected, and his, and mine. That is the point. He placed the 3-seal accord on her desk. Hale read the first section with visible distaste, then slowed at the Iron Gate limits. For the first time, her shoulders eased by a fraction. No entry into purification operations without verified directive, she read aloud, voice tight. Detention requires documented cause, filed with archive. It chains him, Hale said, and there was relief in her anger. It frames him, Elias replied, which is safer. Her eyes moved to the continuity clause, then the renewal mechanism. Hale's frown returned. The provisional directives renew automatically until the reference chain is restored, and end only upon verified certification, logged and authenticated by Silent Tower. You value verification, Elias said gently. This makes verification the exit. Hale stared at him as if trying to find the trick. The trick was that the clause was true and still a trap. Outside the office, a distant chant rose from the concourse, fragments of Vault K3 and AZ-17B thrown into the air like stones. The rumor had matured into a demand for a villain. Hale's voice went quieter. If I don't sign this, Vale will move anyway. And if he moves anyway, Elias said, you will lose the plant to force instead of sharing it with procedure. Hale looked at the paper again, then at the engineer behind her, then back at Elias. You said this was interim, she said. It is, Elias replied, 24 hours at a time. Hale's lips pressed thin. Fine, she said, and the word sounded like surrender disguised as decision. Bring Vale. We sign with conditions, tonight, under record. Elias inclined his head, as if a meeting had simply been scheduled. He left Clearwater with the same calm he carried everywhere, the accord tucked under his arm like a maintenance manual. Behind him, Elias could almost feel Hale's relief harden into certainty, as if the clauses he'd written were a leash she now held. Ahead of him, Vale walked as if legitimacy had already been granted. And between them, Silt Hollow would hear only one thing, a stamped voice promising order in 24-hour increments, long enough to survive, short enough to feel safe and renewable until someone proved the truth had returned. Elias walked back into the silent tower and began preparing the signatures. The signing wasn't ceremonial. Nothing in Silt Hollow was. Elias staged it in a room that could survive a riot. The silent tower's archive bay, concrete walls, one reinforced door, a table bolted to the floor like a promise the city could not move. The air tasted of warm dust and old adhesive, the scent of paper that had outlived bodies. He set out 3 copies of the accord, aligned with meticulous indifference. 3 pens, sanitized for appearance rather than health. A stamp pad. His recorder, silent tower property, its red light blinking like a second heart in the room. Marion Hale arrived first, flanked by 2 Clearwater engineers. Her eyes tracked the document before they tracked Elias, as if the page might attack. Captain Rowan Vale came next, with a sergeant at the door and the quiet confidence of someone used to being the loudest thing in a corridor. He left his rifle outside again. He kept the baton. They sat. The city, somewhere beyond concrete and glass, did not sit. It pressed. It waited. It chanted names it barely understood. Elias opened the meeting the way he opened every meeting, by stripping it of sentiment. For the record, he said, this is the interim 3-seal accord signing. Parties present: Marion Hale, Clearwater Directorate; Captain Rowan Vale, Iron Gate; Elias Cade, Silent Tower Archive. Vale's gaze flicked to the recorder. You love that thing. It loves you, Elias said. It remembers. Hale didn't smile. Read the limits again. Elias didn't read them. He slid the page across to her so her eyes could do it without giving her the satisfaction of hearing his voice shape her boundaries. Hale's finger landed on the clause she'd clung to since he'd put it on her desk. No entry into purification operations without verified directive. Detention requires documented cause filed with the archive. She exhaled through her nose, controlled. Vale scanned the continuity clause, then the renewal mechanism, and his mouth tightened the way it did when something tasted too clever. 24 hours, Vale said. Renewable. Conditional, Elias corrected. Renewal is automatic only if the reference chain remains unrestored. Termination requires verified certification logged and authenticated by Silent Tower. Hale's eyes sharpened at that final phrase, still uneasy with how neatly it made her truth dependent on his stamp. Proceed, Elias said. Hale signed first. Her signature was hard and precise, the kind that looked like it had been practiced in margins. She pressed her Clearwater seal into the page with a firmness that made the paper bow. For a moment, Elias could almost see the satisfaction in her. This document at least obeyed. Vale took the pen next. He hesitated at the line marked force, as if the word itself were an insult. Then he signed in a bold, impatient stroke, less a signature than a declaration, and slammed his iron gate seal down with enough pressure to leave the faint ghost of the emblem on the sheet beneath. Elias signed last. His signature was plain. The stamp was what mattered. When he pressed the Silent Tower seal into the paper, the sound was small, soft rubber against pulp, but in his mind it echoed through the concourse like a lock turning. He lifted the page, checked the alignment of the 3 seals, and nodded once. Accord is in effect, he said, effective immediately. Vale leaned back, exhaling. Good. Now authorize the plant secure. Hale stiffened. No entry into operations. I said security, Vale snapped. Perimeter, doors, passage lanes. Elias raised a hand, not high, not dramatic, just enough to remind them the room existed because he permitted it. We will issue a unified bulletin, he said. Simple, clear. No claims, no denials, only structure. He stood, gathered the stamped copies, and walked to the adjacent broadcast booth. The booth had a scratched glass pane and a microphone that had turned fear into compliance for years. Behind him, Hale and Vale followed, not because they trusted him, but because the city did. Lena Price waited at the console, headset around her neck, eyes a fraction too bright. They're here, she said. I can see, Elias replied. He loaded the bulletin draft, short and clean, and began to speak. This is a verified public bulletin from the Silent Tower archive, he said. An interim coordination framework is now active. All directives regarding distribution, security movement, and quality hold procedures will be issued under verified seal. Maintain queue markers. Do not approach purification gates. Further instructions will follow. Hale's shoulders eased at the phrasing. Vale's jaw tightened at the implication. The moment Elias finished, the room's lights flickered. Once, twice. Then the world dropped out. The console screens went black. The strip lights died. The hum of the relay collapsed into a silence so abrupt it felt like pressure leaving a wound. Even the indicator LEDs, those little promises of function, blinked out. For half a second, nobody moved. In a city built on broadcast, silence was an event. Then the concourse noise surged through the walls, muffled at first, then louder, like a wave finding a crack. Elias could feel the basin below reacting to the absence of sound, the way a body reacted to the absence of air. Vale swore under his breath. "What is this?" Hale turned sharp. "Your people." "My people can't cut power in your tower," Vale hissed. "They can cut anything," Hale snapped. "That's what they do." Elias didn't look at either of them. He looked at the console's dead face as if it were merely a paused clock. Lena's fingers moved fast over a manual panel, flipping a breaker, checking a battery indicator that refused to light. Her voice came tight. "Power fault. Mainline dropped. Backup didn't catch." "How long?" Hale demanded. Lena shook her head once. "If the battery packs—" Outside, a distant scream threaded into the roar. Then another. The city didn't know why the tower went quiet. It only knew it had. Vale stepped toward the door. "I'm going to the basin. We lock it down." Hale grabbed his sleeve. "You touched the plant, and this is a coup." Vale jerked free. "This is survival." Elias turned, finally, and his voice did what the lights could not. It restored hierarchy. "No one moves," he said. Vale's eyes narrowed. "You don't have authority to—" Elias held up the signed accord, its 3 seals catching what little emergency light bled from the hallway. "Yes," he said quietly. "I do. Under the continuity clause." Hale's mouth opened, then closed. She had read the clause. She had signed it. Elias stepped back to the console and pulled open the manual broadcast drawer. A relic system, ugly and reliable, with a hand-crank generator and a low-power transmitter, meant for exactly this. A city on the edge of eating itself. Lena's gaze snapped to him. "That's going to hit every speaker." "That's the point," Elias said. He cranked once, twice. The transmitter whined awake like an old animal dragged from sleep. A single indicator light flickered to life, weak but present. He pressed the microphone switch. The first second was only static. Then his voice cut through, calm enough to feel inhuman. "This is a provisional directive under the 3-seal accord," Elias said, each word placed like a stamp. "Due to coordination interruption and signal instability, the Silent Tower is issuing Provisional Directive Number 1. Behind him, Vale went still. Hale's face tightened, pale. "Effective immediately," Elias continued, "all emergency directives, including crowd control measures, access restrictions, and distribution adjustments, carry force only when authenticated by Silent Tower verification." He paused, letting the sentence sink into the city's bones. "This provisional directive remains active," he said, "until the reference chain is restored and recertified under verified seal." The words reference chain gave Clearwater a procedural anchor. The words authenticated by Silent Tower gave Iron Gate a leash that looked like law. The city heard only one thing. The silence had been replaced by a rule. Elias cut the mic. For a moment, the roar beyond the walls faltered, confused, interrupted by the reappearance of a voice the city had learned to obey. The panic didn't vanish. It reorganized. Vale's stare burned into Elias's profile. "You just made yourself the bottleneck." Elias didn't look back. "The city already did," he said. "I'm only recording it." Hale's hands trembled once, then steadied. "When the power returns—" "It will," Elias said, and he believed it the way he believed schedules. Not because they were true, but because people acted as if they were. He set the stamped accord back on the table, 3 seals facing up. In Silt Hollow, water could be withheld. Guns could be resisted. But a verified directive, spoken into a city that feared silence, was something else entirely. The morning after the signing, Silt Hollow moved as if it had been threatened and forgiven in the same breath. People still queued, they still argued. But they argued inside boundaries now, inside the new shape the city had been told was real. Provisional Directive Number 1 had done what bulletins always did. It did not remove fear. It gave fear a schedule. Inside the silent tower, Elias Cade listened to the building like an instrument. The relay hummed again, steadier than it had been during the fault. The main consoles had rebooted cleanly. Too cleanly. Lena Price stood at the calibration station with a printout in her hands, knuckles pale against the paper's edge. "Elias," she said. He didn't look up. "If it's another request queue—" "It's not," Lena said, and that alone was enough to make him turn. She slid the printout across the console. Not a memo, not a complaint. Raw system output. A sequence of events that machines recorded without drama. Calibration baseline, change event. Delta plus 0.04 NTU user. Token automaint, archive SVC, timestamp 0512. Day 1. Audit flag routine. Lena's finger hovered over the timestamp. "That service token shouldn't be able to touch baseline," she said softly. Not unless it's routed through archive authentication," Elias finished. She looked at him, eyes searching his face for a reaction he didn't offer. "It's in the log now because of the reboot," she said. "The power fault dumped the cached audit trail to print." Elias read the line again, slow. The delta was small, the label was harmless, but the existence of the event, written down in a format meant for engineers, not crowds, was a needle in the city's skin. It didn't matter if the shift was defensible, it mattered that it existed. "How many people saw this?" he asked. "Only me," Lena said quickly. "I pulled it the moment it posted." Elias nodded once. He could feel the near miss in his throat, like a swallowed shard. "Good," he said. Lena hesitated, voice thinning. "It points back here." "It points to a token," Elias corrected, keeping his tone flat. "Tokens get copied." Her eyes flicked to the door, then back. "If Marion Hale asks for audit access—" As if summoned by the word asks, a knock struck the intake room door. Hard, official, impatient. 2 taps, no pause. Elias didn't tell Lena to hide the printout. He didn't need to. She already had it folded, already moving like someone who understood what paper could do to a life. He opened the door. Marion Hale stood in the hallway with 2 Clearwater engineers and the kind of controlled anger that didn't leak into shouting because it had been trained not to. Behind her, an iron gate runner waited with a sealed pouch, watching without pretending not to. "Archivist," Hale said, and the title sounded like accusation. Elias stepped aside. "Watermaster." Hale entered without invitation and planted a binder on the nearest desk. The binder opened to a page of questions, not handwritten, but typed, formatted, professional. "Under Provisional Directive 1, she said, your tower now authenticates emergency directives. Fine, but the justification for the hold remains technical, and your bulletin keeps repeating reference chain invalid as if it is a natural disaster." "It is a procedural disaster," Elias said. "It is a custody log," Hale snapped. "It has names, it has times, it has hands. I want the full chain of custody record and your verification audit trail since the alert." One of her engineers added too quickly, including baseline events. Elias felt Lena go very still behind him, a presence that was suddenly loud. He regarded Hale's binder as if it were merely another request in the queue. "You're requesting Silent Tower internal logs." "I'm requesting the truth," Hale said, "because rumor is eating my directorate alive, and I won't have my plant judged by ghosts." Elias's eyes flicked to the iron gate runner with the pouch. "And Iron Gate?" Hale's mouth tightened. "Vale is preparing to stabilize again. I need to know what you're authenticating, and I need to know what you're hiding." There it was, direct finally. The accusation she'd been circling since the night of the fault. Elias didn't deny it. Denial would make it personal. He made it procedural. "Under the Accord," he said calmly, "log integrity is evidence. Evidence cannot be opened by a single seal without risk of tampering." Hale's eyes narrowed. "That isn't in the Accord." It's in standard archive practice, Elias said, and he watched her register the difference between what was written and what was enforceable. If you want the audit trail, we can initiate a joint integrity review. A review, Hale repeated, as if tasting the word for poison. 3 parties present, Elias said. 3 seals, full chain of custody, full audit trail, logged to the record, no selective leaks. One of Hale's engineers bristled. We don't have time. You have exactly enough time to do this properly, Elias replied, or you will do it in public, under pressure, with Iron Gate's boots in your hallway. Hale's gaze sharpened toward him. For a moment, Elias saw the fear beneath her competence, the fear of being right and still losing. And while we wait for your review, she said, voice clipped, the rumor continues. The basin continues. Vale continues. Elias nodded as if conceding a point, then pivoted. The rumor isn't sustained by engineering, he said. It's sustained by an unverified transmission that cited internal Clearwater documentation. Form W9C, batch code AZEDA17B, vault designation. Hale stiffened, and the engineers behind her went pale. They had tried to pretend the details were fabrications. Hearing them repeated in this room made them real again. Elias continued, voiced the same measured tone he used for bulletins. That transmission was either generated by someone with access or by someone who stole access. Hale's eyes narrowed. Are you suggesting Clearwater sabotage? I'm suggesting a breach, Elias said, and breaches are often blamed on whoever benefits from the panic. The Iron Gate runner shifted, attention sharpening. Hale caught it too, her jaw tightening. Elias turned slightly and addressed the runner without fully looking at him, as if the man were another line in a report. Tell Captain Vale, Elias said, that Silent Tower is opening an incident file, unauthorized transmission and tower power fault. Request Iron Gate provide a containment detail for investigation, not plant control. Investigation. The runner blinked. Under what authority? Elias tapped the folder on the desk. 3 seals, fresh ink, undeniable. Under Provisional Directive 1, he said, authenticated. The runner nodded once and left. Hale stared at Elias, suspicion battling relief. You're diverting, she said quietly. I'm stabilizing, Elias corrected, and I'm preventing the worst possible outcome. Iron Gate, finding its own truth inside your plant. Hale's eyes flicked once toward the intake room consoles, toward the places where the baseline lived behind numbers. When do I get my audit trail? Elias met her gaze. When we can do it without destroying the city in the process. He pulled a blank form from the archive drawer and began filling it out in front of her. Slow, clean, official. Incident file initiation, unauthorized transmission, power fault status. Active access. Restricted pending joint integrity review. Next action, identify rogue actor, recover handshake keys, secure relay points. He stamped it with the Silent Tower seal and slid it across the desk. Hale read the header, then the restriction line. She hated it. She could not argue with it without admitting she was afraid of procedure. One more thing, Elias said, as if remembering it late. Hale looked up. Until the reference chain is restored, Elias said, voice calm as a lock. Provisional Directive 1 renews automatically. He watched the weight of that settle into her posture. Outside in the concourse, the city continued to breathe through rumor and schedules. Inside, Elias watched Marion Hale leave with an incident file instead of his logs, her suspicion redirected toward a faceless saboteur. Lena waited until the door shut before she spoke. You just sealed the audit, she whispered. You just... I followed procedure, Elias said. He held out his hand. Lena hesitated, then placed the folded printout into his palm. Elias didn't tear it up. He didn't hide it in a pocket like contraband. He slid it into a file sleeve, stamped the sleeve with restricted, pending review, and locked it in the archive drawer with a key that only the Silent Tower kept. The city wanted a culprit. Elias had just given it a category. All that remained was to choose a name. The morning didn't bring clarity. It brought structure, thin, official, and hungry. Silt Hollow had learned to breathe in 24-hour increments. The Provisional Directive renewed at dawn the way fever returned, not because anyone wanted it, but because the city had no other rhythm left. What had once been a water crisis had become a paperwork climate, and everyone stood under it like they stood under weather. Elias Cade read the overnight Coup reports with the same calm he used to read sensor output. Basin Station had held. The passage lanes had held. The rumor had not. Vault K3, AZ-17B, withholding. Words were easier to carry than canisters. Lena Price hovered at the edge of his console, restless in the way she became when a system looked stable but felt wrong. Iron Gate is moving people, she said, not the usual shoving, lists, names. Elias didn't look up. Detentions. And Clearwater is panicking, Lena continued. Hale's requesting a public demonstration. She wants to open K3. Elias finally turned his head toward the glass. The basin below wasn't rioting yet. It was watching the silent tower speakers, watching Iron Gate hands, watching Clearwater coats. A city wasn't dangerous when it was loud. It was dangerous when it got quiet and decided who it hated. A chime cut through the intake room, an incoming request packet stamped with 2 headers. Iron Gate, emergency authentication. Request Clearwater, urgent authentication request. Elias opened Iron Gates first. Captain Rowan Vale wanted authorization for a containment sweep. Temporary detentions of instigators, restricted movement through corridors leading to the plant, and a hard lock on Basin Station until public compliance stabilized. The phrasing was cleaner than IG-22 had been. Vale learned fast. He had discovered that the most violent orders were the ones that sounded boring. Elias opened Clearwater's next. Marion Hale wanted authorization to open Vault K3 and deploy Azure cores under supervised chain of custody, with full logging and public confirmation. She wanted water and proof in the same sentence. Both requests required the silent tower to become the hinge. That was the shape Elias had been building from the first bulletin, and now it stood tall enough to cast shadow. He closed both files without responding. Prep the broadcast booth, Elias told Lena, and print the IG-22 record. Lena's eyes sharpened. The old order. The one with the signature, Elias said, the one that tells the truth without trying. Lena hesitated, then moved. She didn't argue. Silt Hollow didn't reward arguments. It rewarded timing. Elias pulled a slim sleeve from the archive drawer. IG-22, Basin Station. Crowd stabilization, time-stamped, preserved. He slid it beside a second sleeve marked Restricted. Incident file, the one he'd opened to chase a rogue actor. The baseline event printout slept inside that sleeve like a tooth hidden under the tongue. He didn't need it today. He needed something that didn't point back to him. He needed Vale. By midday, Elias had called an interim stability address, a phrase that sounded harmless enough to pass without protest. Hale arrived with 2 engineers and a folder of forms. Vale arrived with a sergeant and a posture that said the room belonged to him, even when the lock said otherwise. The broadcast booth was small, glass-fronted, built to turn a human voice into city law. Outside it, the corridor had filled with silent tower runners and a thin iron gate detail that waited like a threat pretending to be a precaution. Hale spoke first, before anyone could mistake the meeting for equal. "I'm done being accused by static," she said. "Open the vault, let the city see the cause, let the water run clear." Vale's eyes flicked toward the glass as if he could see the basin through concrete. "You want to give them a show," he said. "A little light on metal so they clap and go back to their markers." "I want them alive," Hale snapped, "and I want my directorate to stop being carved up by rumor." Vale's voice stayed low. "Rumor is handled by enforcement." "Enforcement isn't water," Hale shot back. Vale leaned in toward Elias, as if shifting the argument onto the only person the city would actually listen to. "Authenticate my sweep," he said. "The vault can wait. We handle the agitators first, then we do your demonstration." Hale's gaze went sharp. "So you can hold the city by the throat while you decide who deserves to drink." Vale's mouth twitched. "So the city doesn't bite." Elias let the silence stretch just long enough for both to feel the weight of their dependence. He did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. Both requests are under accord scope, Elias said, calm as a checklist. Both require authentication. Vale's eyes narrowed. Then authenticate. Hale's jaw tightened. Authenticate the vault. Elias turned slightly so the microphone was in his peripheral vision, and the recorder's red light blinked where both of them could see it. Records made people careful. Care made people predictable. Captain Vale, Elias said, you are requesting detentions. Vale didn't flinch. Temporary. Based on what verified cause? Elias asked. Vale's stare hardened. The city is unstable. Instability is not cause, Elias said. Vale's impatience surfaced, thin and sharp. You're going to lecture me on cause while people faint in the queue? Elias nodded once, as if accepting the complaint. No, he said, I'm going to read the record. Vale's expression shifted, a fraction too late. Elias took the printed page from the desk and held it up, not theatrically, just high enough for the booth camera to catch, the way you'd hold up a seal to show it was real. Archived record extract, Elias said into the microphone, voice measured and neutral. Iron Gate Order IG-22. Basin Station Crowd Stabilization. Measures include gate lockdown, queue hold, and detention of disruptors. Signed by Captain Rowan Vale. Hale's head snapped toward Vale. Vale's eyes stayed on Elias, and something in them sharpened into calculation. Elias continued, still reading. This order was issued during Window 2, prior to archive authentication and prior to any verified cause being filed. It was not executed only because a verified public bulletin superseded it. Vale's jaw tightened. That's history. It's pattern, Elias replied without looking at him. Hale's voice cut in, cold. You were going to cuff people for the crime of being thirsty. Vale's gaze flicked to her. I was going to prevent panic. You were going to manufacture obedience, Hale said. Vale turned back to Elias. You're broadcasting internal records. I'm broadcasting the parts that are already city history, Elias said. The basin saw cuffs. The basin saw the lock. The basin saw your men hesitate when the archive spoke. This record only gives their memory a stamp. Vale's voice lowered. Careful, archivist. Elias didn't react. Threats were noise. He dealt in signals. Under Provisional Directive 1, Elias said into the microphone, emergency measures carry force only when authenticated by silent tower verification. Detentions require documented cause filed with the archive. He set IG-22 down on the desk, like a verdict. And under the 3-seal accord, Elias added, any action that risks public order without verified procedure is a breach of the interim framework. Vale's eyes hardened. Are you accusing me of breach? Elias looked at him at last. I'm stating that the city will interpret you as the threat, he said, because you have given them documents to do it with. Hale's breathing steadied. The anger in her face didn't fade, but it became usable, directed. Stand down, she said to Vale, or you'll prove every rumor right. Vale's hand drifted toward his baton as if the room might need reminding who survived the old world. He stopped himself. The microphone was live. The city was listening. Violence in private could be denied. Violence in a record became permanent. Elias didn't give him time to recover control of the narrative. Now, Elias said, turning a page as if the meeting had always been about procedure, Clearwater's request. Hale blinked, thrown off by the pivot. Vault K3, she said quickly. Azure core deployment. Full chain of custody. Immediate. Elias nodded once. Custodian of record is Deputy Quinn Mercer. Hale's lips tightened. Yes. Elias tapped his slate. Deputy Mercer is present. Quinn Mercer stepped from the corridor shadow like someone who had been waiting for a cue. He carried a folder and wore his clean boots like a promise. He didn't look at Vale. He didn't need to. Vale wasn't the audience anymore. I'm here, Quinn said. Vale's stare cut toward him. Of course you are. Elias held out a form, Clearwater's own internal authorization sheet, adapted into the Accord's multi-seal format. Water seal, Elias said, and slid it to Hale. Hale signed without hesitation this time, her Clearwater seal pressed into the paper like relief. Custodian seal, Elias said, and slid it to Quinn. Quinn signed with a steady hand. The moment looked mundane. That was why it worked. Revolutions that wore uniforms got shot. Revolutions that wore paperwork got filed. Vale leaned forward, voice low and dangerous. "You're doing this without Force Seal." Elias didn't look up. "Force Seal is not required for a technical release," he said calmly. "Force is required for crowd measures and perimeter movement. Your own petition makes that distinction." Vale's mouth tightened. "You're cutting me out." Elias finally met his eyes again. "You cut yourself out," he said, "when you tried to replace verification with cuffs." He slid the form to himself last. "Signal authentication," Elias said into the microphone, letting the city hear the phrase that mattered most. He stamped it. The sound was soft, the effect wasn't. "Vault K3 release is authenticated," Elias announced. "Azure core deployment approved under logged custody and verified seal." Hale exhaled like someone whose lungs had been clenched for days. Quinn's expression stayed modest, almost humble, perfect optics for a man who wanted power without looking like he wanted it. Vale's face didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. He was watching a door close that he hadn't noticed was open. Elias flipped the microphone again, voice turning into public shape. "This is a verified public bulletin from the Silent Tower archive," he said. "Vault K3 access has been authenticated for Azure core deployment. Clearwater will proceed under logged custody. Iron Gate will maintain passage lanes only. No detentions will proceed without verified cores under archive seal." Down in the concourse, the city heard what it wanted to hear. Water is coming. Not because anyone was kind, not because anyone was brave, because a stamp had been applied. Hale moved fast. Her engineers left the booth at a near run, already speaking in clipped technical phrases: core seating, flow redirection, particulate capture, language that sounded like salvation when you didn't understand it. Quinn followed at a measured pace, carrying the folder like a relic. Vale stayed. "You just made yourself the judge," he said quietly. Elias's voice remained even. "No," he said, "I made the record legible." Vale's nostrils flared. "You think the basin will thank you?" "They'll thank the water," Elias said. "They'll forget the method. That's always the point." A distant cheer rolled faintly through the concrete as the first public speaker crackled with an updated status. Clearwater confirming core installation, flow stabilizing, turbidity dropping. People didn't understand turbidity. They understood the change in the air when hope arrived. Vale's shoulders shifted, a man adjusting to a new balance of power he hadn't agreed to. "What now?" he asked, and for the first time it sounded less like a threat and more like uncertainty. Elias picked up IG-22 again and slid it into a file sleeve with deliberate care. "Now," Elias said, "you wait for the city to decide who kept them alive." Vale's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. He couldn't. Not without becoming exactly what Elias had just stamped him as. Outside, clean water began to run. Not everywhere, not immediately, but enough. Enough to quiet the basin. Enough to make the rumor collapse under a simpler truth. The crisis had never been purely chemical. It had been administrative. And as the first canisters filled, the city learned the lesson Elias had been teaching since the first bulletin. In Silt Hollow, scarcity was managed by valves, but fate was managed by authorization. 3 days later, the basin sounded different. Not quieter, Silt Hollow never became quiet, but the noise had lost its edge. People still argued over queue markers and ration codes, still cursed scanners that refused a worn card. They argued like people who believed tomorrow existed. Water did that, not the kind that washed, just the kind that arrived on schedule. Clearwater posted a public notice in the concourse. Turbidity stabilized. Core seating verified. Flow normalized. The words meant nothing to most of the line, but the canister's filling meant everything. They had heard it the first time in the only language the city trusted. A stamped voice promising water because the release had been authenticated. The political reassignments followed like paperwork after a death. Marion Hale remained at the plant, but not at the top. Her new title, Chief Technical Steward, was a complement that functioned as a cage. She signed reports and calibrated sensors while someone else signed the city. Quinn Mercer took the seat above her with an interim ribbon wrapped around it. Acting Directorate Liaison. He held the vault keys on paper, the way he always had, but now the paper carried a new weight. He didn't celebrate, he didn't gloat. He simply began issuing the kinds of memos that sounded like continuity and meant control. Captain Rowan Vale did not get arrested. That would have made him a martyr. Instead, he was rotated to an outer checkpoint, a position described as critical, distant, and quietly irrelevant. The order was clean, bureaucratic, and merciless. Temporary redeployment for perimeter stability. His signature remained in the archive, preserved as history he could never out-argue. Elias Cade watched all of it from behind reinforced glass, where the city's faith was routed into speakers and panels. The incident file closed without drama, rogue actor identified, handshake keys compromised, corrective action taken. A name filled the blank, someone low enough to be believable, high enough to satisfy the need for blame. The city didn't ask what corrective meant. It only asked whether the next window would hold. Lena Price stood beside Elias's console as he prepared the day's bulletin. Her eyes flicked once toward the locked drawer, the sleeve stamped restricted, pending review, then away again. Elias issued the update with the same flat calm he'd used from the first alert. Reference chain restoration has been verified, he read, and the words should have ended the provisional era. They didn't. The new bulletin simply replaced the old clause with a new name. Standard Verification Continuity Protocol. Same function, cleaner branding, the same bottleneck, now framed as safety. Down below, the line moved. The city exhaled and accepted the mechanism that kept its canisters filling, never noticing the subtle trade it had made. Elias looked across Silt Hollow, its cues, its seals, its obedient pauses whenever a speaker crackled, and felt the truth settle into place with the soft finality of a stamp. In the old world, guns ruled because they could end you. In this one, verification ruled because it could decide whether you got to live long enough to care.